Did you know that 72% of Americans now say the economy is in poor shape? And here's the kicker. 65% of middle-class families are struggling financially and don't expect things to improve for the rest of their lives. But what I'm about to reveal isn't just another doom and gloom story. I've spent the last 2 weeks analyzing economic reports and talking to families across the country, and what I discovered is shocking. This collapse isn't coming, it's already here, and it's affecting everyday Americans in ways most people aren't even talking about yet. Listen up, because I'm about to show you exactly how everyday life in America is crumbling right before our eyes. And trust me, you need to hear this whether you're making $50,000 or $150,000 a year. Before we dive in, let me be real with you. This isn't fear-mongering. These are facts backed by data from CBS News, CNN, and recent government reports. If this information helps you understand what's really happening, hit that like button and subscribe, because I'll be breaking down exactly how to protect yourself in upcoming videos. Now, let's talk about what's really going on. The housing nightmare that nobody saw coming. Here's something that'll make you stop and think. In 2025, the median home price in major cities has surged 20 to 25% in just 3 years. Yes, you heard that right, 25 to 25%. But here's where it gets really interesting. I recently spoke with Jennifer, a 34-year-old nurse in Boston who's been saving for a house for 6 years. Guess what? Her down payment goal keeps moving further away. Last year, she needed $80,000. Now that same house requires $110,000, and her wages barely increased. Let me break down the math that nobody's talking about. The Census Bureau reports median household income is about $74,500. But here's the shocking part, $74,500. The baseline cost of a normal middle-class life, mortgage, car, childcare, healthcare, easily reaches $120,000 to $140,000 a year in most metro areas. Do the math? That's a $45,000 to $65,000 gap every single year. And renters don't think you're safe. Average rents hit $1,800 in smaller towns and over $3,000 in urban areas. That's 40 to 50% of take-home pay, way more than the recommended 30%. Here's what most people don't realize. Housing costs aren't just about your monthly payment. When your furnace breaks, when property taxes spike, when insurance doubles, you're one emergency away from financial disaster. Quick reality check. A recent study found that only 20% of young adults believe they'll be better off than their parents. That's a historic low. Folks, the grocery store. Reality check. Now let's talk about something you're feeling every single week. Your grocery bill. And trust me, what I'm about to share isn't just statistics. It's real families making heartbreaking choices just to eat. Listen up. Rebecca White, a bank worker in Cincinnati, told NPR something that made me stop in my tracks. She said, "Sometimes I'll skip breakfast and then just have lunch and dinner so that I don't have to buy another meal." Yes, you heard that right. A working professional is skipping meals to save money on groceries. But here's where it gets absolutely shocking. According to the latest Bureau of Labor Statistics data from September 2025, grocery inflation just hit a 2-year high at 2.7%, the fastest pace we've seen since 2023. And before you think, well, 2.7% doesn't sound that bad, wait until you hear the real numbers. Steak prices, up 16.6% year over year. Ground beef, nearly 13% higher. Coffee just surged by 21% thanks to new tariffs. And eggs, holy cow, up 165% since the bird flu crisis began in 2022. That carton that cost you $2.50 2 years ago is now hitting $6.23 at its peak. Here's what really gets me. I talked to Joseph Macias last week, a single dad and cook in Colorado Springs. He told me, "I'd try to find the cheapest stuff of everything I can, and I still ended up spending $117 on maybe 20 items, and it was mainly just necessities for my fridge, paper towels, and a couple things my 4-year-old daughter needed. 20 items. $117. Just the basics." But wait, it gets worse. A recent national survey found that Americans are now spending an average of $235 per week on groceries. Do the math with me. That's over $900 per month per person. For a family of 4, you're looking at $3,600 a month just to eat. And here's something that'll blow your mind. According to research from the University of Florida, people don't assess food costs the way economists do. Shoppers compare what they're paying today to what they paid several years ago, and that gap is massive. Let me break down what this actually means. Food prices have jumped 29% since pre-pandemic levels. Almost half of Americans, 49%, say it's harder to afford groceries today than it was just a year ago. Only 19% said food prices are cheaper. Let that sink in. But here's the part that made my blood boil. In the Washington, D.C. area, a recent survey found that 55% of households are now buying lower cost, less healthy food to stretch their dollars. Translation? Families are sacrificing nutrition just to survive. And it's not just low-income families anymore. The survey showed that even households earning between $79,000 and $179,000 reported their finances had declined. Think about that. People making 6 figures are struggling to afford groceries. I recently spoke with a grocery store manager at Kroger who shared something disturbing. He's seeing shoppers making smaller, more frequent trips to the store, using more coupons than ever before, and switching to cheaper private label products. But here's the kicker. He said people come in looking stressed, calculating every purchase, and putting items back before checkout. Quick reality check. 1/3 of households are now using credit cards for groceries, and 20% didn't pay their full balance at month's end. That means people are going into debt just to feed their families. So the next time someone tells you the economy is doing great, remember Rebecca skipping breakfast, Joseph spending $117 on $20 items, and millions of Americans choosing between paying rent or buying healthy food. That's the grocery store reality in 2025. The healthcare crisis. Nobody's prepared for. Here's where things get really scary, and I mean really scary. The average family health insurance premium rose to $23,968 annually in 2023. That's a 7% increase from 2022. But here's the kicker, that's just the premium. I talked to Jeremy, a web developer in Kansas last week. His family's monthly healthcare premiums are jumping 18% to $2,600 next year. He told me something that stuck with me. We're not talking about eating beans and rice, but going from a comfortable middle-class lifestyle to eating how we did when we first got out of college. And if you think that's bad, wait until you hear this. Tax credits that help families afford health insurance expire at the end of 2025. The Commonwealth Fund estimates nearly 5 million Americans will lose health insurance next year. Let me break down what this really means. Low and middle-income households that qualified for tax credits will see their premiums jump from an average of $888 in 2025 to $1,104 in 2026. That's more than doubling, folks. Quick warning, if you're relying on ACA subsidies, you need to prepare for this now, not next year. The debt trap. That's swallowing families whole now. Here's something most news outlets aren't covering properly: the debt crisis that's quietly destroying middle-class America. Listen to this. 59% of Americans lack sufficient savings to cover even a $1,000 emergency expense. Let that sink in. 6 out of 10 people can't handle a $1,000 surprise. But here's what really blew my mind when I dove into the research. Credit card delinquencies are at a 13-year high. Families aren't using credit cards for luxuries. They're using them to cover rent, insurance, and grocery bills. I recently interviewed Sarah, a public school teacher in a major city. She works full-time, has a master's degree, and can't afford to leave her tiny one-bedroom apartment. Why? Because she's carrying $18,000 in credit card debt from just trying to survive the last 3 years. Here's the pattern I'm seeing everywhere. One unexpected expense, a car repair, or a medical bill. And families who thought they were doing okay suddenly can't dig themselves out. The economic implications are terrifying. High debt-to-income ratios reduce consumer spending power, limit housing market participation, and basically trap people in financial quicksand. The energy bills nobody saw coming. Let's talk about something that's hitting your wallet harder than you probably realize. Utility costs. Americans now pay an average of $265 per month in utility costs. That's up 12% since last year, but here's the really concerning part. In 2025 alone, more than 124 million Americans are expected to see some sort of rate increase in their energy bill. Here's what the big energy companies don't want you to know. These aren't temporary spikes. Electricity demand is outstripping supply, and those costs are only going one direction, up. I spoke with Maria, a single mom in Florida whose electric bill jumped from $180 to $310 in just 1 year. Same house, same usage pattern. Nothing changed except the rates. And here's something most people overlook. The energy burden falls 3 to 5 times harder on low and middle-income families, who spend 6 to 10% of their income on energy compared to higher-income households. Quick tip, I learned from an energy expert that even if you shut off every light, some fixed costs are unavoidable, like delivery charges. You're paying for infrastructure whether you use it or not. The childcare catastrophe. Now let me share something that makes my blood boil because it's affecting millions of families. The childcare crisis. In 2024, the average annual cost of care for one child topped $13,000. That's up 30% from 2020. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. That's just the average. In major cities, families are paying $1,000 to $1,500 per child per month. Do you know what that means? A family with 2 kids in childcare is paying $24,000 to $36,000 a year, just so they can go to work and earn money. I recently spoke with David and Michelle, a couple in Seattle, both working full-time and earning a combined $135,000. Sounds good, right? Wrong. After childcare, housing, and basic expenses, they have $400 left each month for everything else. Savings, emergencies, fun, literally everything. Here's the crazy part. A study found that the cost of childcare now exceeds the price of college tuition in 38 states. Think about that. Childcare costs more than college. The commuting costs. That came roaring back. Here's something that caught a lot of people off guard. Many companies are forcing employees back to the office after years of remote work. Guess what that means? The average American now spends over $200 monthly on commuting fuel, parking, and public transit, plus increased spending on childcare. I talked to Robert, who was working remotely for 3 years. His company called everyone back to the office. His monthly cost jumped by $480 overnight for gas, parking, and before and after school care for his kids. But here's what nobody's calculating: the time cost. He's now spending 10 hours a week commuting. That's 520 hours a year that could be spent with family or working a side hustle to make up for all these increased costs. The wage growth illusion. Now let me expose something that'll really frustrate you. The wage growth lie. Over the past decade, real wages adjusted for inflation have grown by less than 0.5% annually, while the cost of living has increased much faster. Here's what that actually means. In 2024, inflation hovered around 3 to 4%, but wage growth for middle-income earners was closer to 2%, so you're actually losing purchasing power every single year. I recently came across research that showed a household making $100,000 today has the same purchasing power as about $80,000 in 2020. Let me repeat that. If you're making 6 figures today, you're living like someone who made $80,000 just 5 years ago. Quick reality check. This is why you feel like you're working harder than ever, but getting further behind because you literally are. The mental health toll. Nobody's measuring. Here's something that doesn't show up in economic reports, but it's just as real. The mental health crisis caused by financial stress. According to the American Psychological Association, money is the #1 source of stress for over 60% of Americans. But here's what really got to me. Economic insecurity is linked to depression, anxiety, burnout, and lower life satisfaction. Families are delaying marriage, children, and retirement because of persistent financial uncertainty. I spoke with Dr. Chen, a psychologist who specializes in financial stress. Last week, she told me she's seeing more patients than ever. Couples arguing about money, parents feeling guilty about what they can't provide, and people trapped in jobs they hate just to keep the bills paid. Here's the truth. Nobody wants to talk about how financial stress spills into every corner of life, from physical health to marital satisfaction. The cost isn't just monetary, it's deeply personal. The retirement dream that's slipping away. Let me share something that should terrify anyone over 40, the retirement crisis. Here's what I discovered. 46% of Americans don't have $500 saved for a rainy day. Forget about retirement. We're talking about basic emergency funds. But here's where it gets really dark. If middle-class households aren't saving enough now, their future lifestyle will be anything but comfortable. I recently interviewed Michael. He's 52 years old, works in IT, makes $95,000 a year, and has $27,000 in his 401k. That's it after 30 years of working. He told me something heartbreaking. I know I can't retire at 65, probably not at 70 either. I'll work until I physically can't anymore. And he's not alone. A recent survey found that 40% of all Americans are unable to plan beyond their next paycheck. The student debt anchor. Now let's talk about the generational chain that keeps dragging families underwater with student debt. Millennials and Gen Z, many now in their peak earning years, are still haunted by student debt. Monthly payments can run hundreds or even thousands of dollars. But here's what most people don't realize. It's not just the borrower who's affected. Many parents co-signed loans or are still paying off plus loans. For middle-class families, this means delaying homeownership, skipping vacations, and struggling to save. It's a generational chain of debt that won't break. I spoke with Amanda. She's 35, has a master's degree, works as a marketing manager, and pays $780 a month in student loans. She told me, I make good money, but I can't afford to buy a house, save for retirement, or even think about having kids. The system that's actually broken. Here's what nobody in Washington wants to admit. The system itself is fundamentally broken. According to recent analysis, the proportion of Americans in middle-class households has declined from 61% in 1971 to approximately 51% in 2023. Let me tell you what that really means. The middle class is literally disappearing. But here's the part that makes me angry. When I looked at the data, productivity gains have disproportionately benefited capital, not labor. Translation: companies are making more money than ever, but workers aren't seeing those benefits. Recent studies show that the link between productivity and compensation has weakened over the past several decades. So even when the economy grows, the typical worker barely sees improvement. I talked to an economist who put it bluntly, we've created a system where economic growth happens, but regular families don't benefit. That's not capitalism. That's a rigged game. The political disconnect that makes it worse. Now here's something that'll really frustrate you. Politicians on both sides don't seem to understand or care about this crisis. A recent poll found that only 19% of Americans said food prices are cheaper than a year ago, despite what government reports say about inflation cooling. Here's why that matters. Shoppers assess food costs based on their day-to-day spending, not economic formulas that paint rosy pictures. The Trump administration recently announced policies, but here's what experts are warning. Tariffs could reduce real GDP growth by 0.9 percentage points and potentially contribute to rather than alleviate the cost of living crisis. Meanwhile, government subsidies for childcare, nutrition assistance, and housing vouchers all got cut or allowed to expire. Let me be clear. I'm not here to take political sides. I'm here to tell you the truth. Both parties have failed regular Americans. The warning signs everyone's ignoring. Here's what really keeps me up at night. All the warning signs of a deeper crisis are flashing red. Consumer confidence is near record lows. Credit card delinquencies at 13-year highs, 40% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. But here's what economists are quietly warning about. We may experience a recession in 2025 if current trends continue. I spoke with William Luther, an associate professor of economics at Florida Atlantic University. He told me, there's a reasonable chance we're heading into a recession. The Fed might be overcorrecting for past inflation, and regular families will pay the price. Quick warning, the stock market might be doing well, but that doesn't help the 80% of Americans who don't own significant investments. Let me pull all of this together because it's important you understand the big picture. We're witnessing the collapse of everyday life in America, not in some dramatic Hollywood style, but in a slow, grinding way that's destroying families quietly. Here's what I mean by collapse. A web developer can't afford healthcare premiums. A nurse with a master's degree can't leave her tiny apartment. A couple making $135,000 has $400 left after expenses. This isn't about poverty. This is about the disappearance of stability, security, and hope for the future. I recently came across a quote that perfectly captures this. The economy is booming, and yet many Americans are still gasping for air financially. They simply don't have the breathing room to plan beyond their present needs. That's where we are in 2025. Surviving, not thriving. Now here's the frustrating part. We know what would help, but nobody's doing it. Experts say we need to build more housing, increase wages, tie them to inflation, expand childcare subsidies, make healthcare affordable, and reform the student loan system. But here's the reality. None of that is happening. Instead, we're getting tariffs that raise prices, spending cuts that hurt families, and tax cuts that mostly benefit the wealthy. I'm not trying to be political. I'm telling you what the data shows. One economist told me, we've chosen a path that prioritizes short-term profits over long-term stability for regular families, and we're starting to see the consequences. Listen, I know this has been heavy, but you need to hear the truth so you can prepare. Here's what I've learned from talking to families who are making it work. You can't control the system, but you can control your response. First, track every single expense. I mean everything. You'll be shocked where your money's actually going. Second, build even a small emergency fund. $500, $1,000, anything that prevents you from going into debt for small emergencies. Third, look for ways to increase income side hustles, freelancing, or anything legal that brings in extra cash. Fourth, connect with your community trade skills. Share resources, help each other out. The people who are surviving this crisis aren't doing it alone. And most importantly, talk about this and share this video with friends, family, and coworkers. The more people who understand what's really happening, the more pressure we can put on leaders to actually fix these problems. The future. We're heading toward. Here's what concerns me most. If current trends continue, we're looking at a future where being middle class means constant financial anxiety. Multiple economists have warned that we could see a fundamental reshaping of American society, a wider wealth gap, less economic mobility, and entire generations unable to achieve what their parents had. I recently read a report that said the cost of living crisis of 2025 has marked a turning point in the American economic narrative. It will resonate for years to come. Translation: we're living through a historic shift right now, and most people don't even realize it. Look, I didn't make this video to scare you. I made it to wake you up. The collapse of everyday life in America has officially begun, but collapse doesn't mean everything falls apart overnight. It means a slow erosion of stability, security, and hope. Here's what you need to remember. You're not alone if you're struggling. 65% of middle-class Americans are in the same boat. You're not failing. The system is failing you. When a nurse can't afford an apartment, when a couple making six figures has nothing left to save, when 40% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, that's not individual failure. That's a systemic breakdown. But here's my hope. By understanding what's really happening, we can make better decisions, protect our families, and maybe, just maybe, create enough pressure to force real change. If this video opened your eyes, smash that like button and subscribe. I'll be creating more content on how to survive and even thrive during this economic crisis. Drop a comment telling me your story. What part of this collapse are you experiencing? How are you dealing with it? Let's build a community of people who refuse to suffer in silence. And remember, stay informed, stay prepared, and most importantly, stay strong. We're going to get through this together. I'll see you in the next one.